The Trojan War. It's one of those stories you think you know. There's a giant wooden horse, a beautiful queen, a hero with that one weak spot on his heel. But this is basically the foundation of all Western storytelling. It's an epic that carved out our ideas of what it means to be a hero, what fate is, and what glory looks like, and it's been doing that for thousands of years. We're talking about a brutal 10-year war that really blurs the line between myth and what might have been a very real, very bloody chapter in human history.
So on the surface, the reason for this whole war seems pretty simple, right? The story the ancients told was that it was all about getting a queen back. Paris, a prince of Troy, sails over to Sparta and just leaves with Helen, who happens to be the most beautiful woman in the world and, oh yeah, the wife of King Menelaus. But that's just the mortal version of the story. If you want to know the real reason this whole thing kicked off, the cause that set the entire world on fire, well, we have to look up, way beyond the humans, because this whole mess actually started with the gods.
See, long before a single ship set sail for Troy, there was a nasty argument up on Mount Olympus. The Trojan War wasn't just some human squabble. No, it was the violent, tragic fallout from a bad case of divine vanity, jealousy, and maybe even a cosmic plan to thin out the human population.
And the spark wasn't some big declaration of war. It was something way, way pettier, and it happened at a wedding. Eris, the goddess of discord, who, of course, was not invited, decided to crash the party anyway. And her wedding gift? A single, solid gold apple that she just rolls into the middle of the feast with a simple but absolutely explosive inscription, "To the fairest."
And just like that, the trap is sprung. Three of the most powerful goddesses on Olympus immediately say, "Yep, that's mine." You've got Hera, Zeus's wife, the literal queen of the gods. You have Athena, the fierce goddess of wisdom and battle strategy. And then there's Aphrodite, the irresistible goddess of love. None of them are about to back down. And you can bet no other god was brave enough or foolish enough to try and pick a winner.
So Zeus, being a pretty smart manager, does what anyone would do. He outsources the decision. He passes the buck to a mortal, a young Trojan prince named Paris, who was at the time living a quiet life as a shepherd. It's up to him to make this impossible choice, a single judgment that is going to seal the fate of his entire civilization.
So picture this. Paris is up on Mount Ida, and he's faced with this impossible task. It all happens in 3 steps. First, he's given the apple and the question. But this thing stops being about beauty almost immediately. That brings us to step 2, the bribes. Each goddess comes to him in secret and offers a world-changing reward. And that, of course, leads to the final, fateful choice. And what a choice it was. Hera offered him pure, raw power, the chance to be king over all of Asia. Athena offered him glory, unbeatable skill in battle, and a warrior's wisdom. But Aphrodite, she offered him something totally different. She offered him love. Specifically, the love of Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman alive. Well, Paris was a young man ruled by his heart, not his head. He chose love. He gave the apple to Aphrodite.
Okay, but here's the thing. Aphrodite's prize, Helen, she wasn't exactly available. She was the queen of Sparta, and she was already married to King Menelaus. And here's where it gets really complicated. It's a political time bomb. Before she got married, her father made every single one of her suitors, we're talking all the kings and princes of Greece, swear a sacred oath to defend her marriage, no matter who she ended up choosing. It was a brilliant move designed to prevent a war.
So, with Aphrodite's divine influence making sure Helen would fall for him, Paris sails to Sparta. He's welcomed into the court as an honored guest, and he leaves with the king's wife. When Menelaus finds out, he's furious. He goes straight to his brother, Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, and they invoke the oath. Every single king who swore that promise is now honor-bound to get Helen back. That's how 1,000 ships were launched against Troy.
Now, when the massive Greek army finally landed on the shores of Troy, they came face to face with the city's legendary walls, walls that were said to have been built by the gods themselves. They were completely impenetrable. So what came next wasn't a quick, decisive battle. It was a miserable, grinding, decade-long siege.
10 years. Just let that sink in for a second. An entire generation of soldiers grew up, fought, and died on that one stretch of beach so far from home. For 9 long years, the war was just a brutal, bloody stalemate, filled with little raids and skirmishes, but mostly just growing frustration on both sides.
And here's something you gotta know. The story most of us are familiar with, Homer's Iliad, it's not actually about the whole 10-year war. Not at all. It's really just a snapshot, a super intense look at just a few weeks in that final bloody year.
And it all revolves around the war becoming deeply personal. A bitter feud between the Greeks' greatest warrior, Achilles, and the Trojans' noble champion, Hector.
And the drama just unfolds like a terrible set of dominoes. It starts with pride. Achilles feels dishonored by his commander Agamemnon, so he completely withdraws from the fight. And without him, the Greeks start losing badly. This leads his best friend Patroclus to wear his armor and fight in his place, only to be killed by Hector. That death, it flips a switch. Achilles' wounded pride turns into a terrifying, all-consuming rage. He storms back into battle for one reason and one reason only: revenge. And it all leads to that final, legendary showdown where Achilles hunts down and kills Hector right in front of the Trojan walls. But here's the thing. Killing Troy's greatest hero didn't actually win the war. The city's walls were still standing. And Achilles, the warrior who seemed absolutely invincible, well, he was about to meet his own fate. An arrow shot by Paris, the same man who started this whole mess, was guided by the god Apollo, and it found the one mortal spot on his entire body: his heel. So, with their greatest champion now dead, and the city still unconquered, the Greeks finally had to admit that brute force was never going to be enough. If they couldn't smash their way through the walls of Troy, they were going to have to trick their way inside.
I mean, this was the ultimate military puzzle. After 10 years of throwing everything they had at this city, how do you finally break it? The answer didn't come from the strongest warrior. It came from the smartest one, the cunning Odysseus. The plan was just brilliant and incredibly bold. The Greeks would build this enormous wooden horse and just leave it on the beach. They'd say it was a sacred offering to the goddess Athena to grant them a safe journey home. Then they'd pack up and pretend to sail away, hiding their whole fleet just around the bend. But hidden deep inside the horse's hollow belly, a small team of their absolute best soldiers would be waiting.
And the Trojans, they bought it. They completely ignored the desperate warnings of their own prophets, and they dragged this giant horse inside their city walls as a trophy. They partied deep into the night, convinced the war was finally over. Then, in the dead of night, Odysseus and his men snuck out. They killed the guards, threw open the city gates, and the entire Greek army, which had silently sailed back, poured into the sleeping city. The sack of Troy was total, and it was horrifying.
But in their moments of victory, the Greeks went too far. They committed terrible atrocities. They defiled the Trojan temples, and they earned the wrath of the gods. They had won the war, yes, but their victory was now cursed. For so many of them, the 10-year journey home would turn out to be just as dangerous and deadly as the war itself. And that, of course, is a whole other story: the Odyssey.
For literally thousands of years, that was the story, a magnificent, tragic myth. But eventually, people started asking a question that still fascinates us to this day. Did any of this actually happen? Was there a real Troy? Was there a real Trojan War?
So how do you even begin to separate the myth from potential history? Well, we can probably set aside the gods throwing lightning bolts and the heroes who can't be hurt, but historians have found some really fascinating clues in other ancient records from that time. For instance, texts from the Hittite Empire, a major power back then, mention a powerful kingdom that sounds an awful lot like the Achaean Greeks. And they even talk about a big conflict over a city they called Wilusa, which is linguistically a very, very close match for Ilium, the other Greek name for Troy.
And that brings us to the actual hunt for the city itself. In the 1870s, an archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann started digging at this big mound in modern-day Turkey. He didn't just find one city, he found layers upon layers of cities built on top of each other. And one of those layers, what we now call Troy 7A, shows undeniable signs of a massive fire and of violent destruction, right around the year 1180 BC. That is incredibly close to the date the ancient Greeks themselves always gave for when the war happened.
So where does that leave us? Well, the general consensus among scholars today is this: there probably wasn't a single 10-year war fought over one woman exactly like Homer's epic poem describes. But the legend almost certainly grew out of a historical truth. It's likely a grand poetic mashup of many real Bronze Age conflicts, a whole history of raids and sieges that were passed down as oral stories for centuries, before being woven together into the incredible epic we know today. Which really brings us back to the ultimate question, doesn't it? The story of Troy lives in that amazing gray area between fact and fiction. It's a reflection of a real, brutal, war-torn age, but has been transformed into this timeless story about love and rage and honor and the tragic consequences of our choices. It's a story so powerful that it shaped how an entire civilization saw itself, So, was it a magnificent myth, a historical reality? Or is it, like all the best stories, a brilliant and powerful combination of both? That's the real, enduring legacy of the Trojan War.